Someone listening right now is probably involved in something or engaging in something that if anyone were to find out, you would be in big trouble.
Yeah, and sometimes it feels like there's no way out, that there's no more options, that if this were to come out, that not only would your marriage be threatened, your family could be threatened, but your job would be threatened. You really feel like you're on the precipice of losing it all. The conversation that we just had today with Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith, they tell the story, and really it's a story of confession and healing and redemption. And there is a redemption that comes after some painful pieces. But what do you do if you feel like there is no way out? What do you do if you feel like all is lost and you need the help, you want to stop, and you can't? This was poignant. I think this was helpful, and it was hopeful. Listen to this episode of Life After Ministry. Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith, welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast.
Wonderful to be here.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Hailing from Memphis, Tennessee, we're going to dive into your story, and I'm so excited to be welcoming back my wife. Hi, Marilee.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Yeah,
it's been a minute.
It has. We've been a little busy, but I'm glad that you're here. And I think everybody else who's listening is probably much more glad that you're here, but that's good. Hey, well, Matthew and Joanna, we met at the AACC conference, all these conferences that have all of these initials and acronyms. The American Association of Christian Counselors, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah.
And that means that you, like so many people at that conference, you guys are in the world of mental health, healing and wholeness. And you also come from a background of the ministry world. So take us back. How did you guys all meet? That's my wife's favorite question of all. But how did you meet, and where did your ministry life start?
Yeah. We met in Memphis, actually, quite a few years ago, and met through Joanna's older brother. He was actually the worship leader for our youth band. He kind of put our youth worship band together. I was a youth pastor at the time, and he and I got to be really fast friends. And then he introduced me to his little sister. We did not get along well at first. There was some clash. There's some clashing.
Not fans of each other.
But eventually, just time wore her down, and we eventually found out we actually really do like each other. We like hanging out, and we kind of had a whirlwind romance. We went on 4 dates and got engaged in 2 months between our kind of first date and our engagement, and then got married 2 months after that. Which her brother wasn't a huge fan of that kind of time frame. I think he would have liked 4 years.
Come around since then, but
and part of what I think drew us to each other was we both had a heart for ministry, and we weren't quite sure what that was going to look like together. I had been in ministry for a little bit before I met Joanna, actually about 10 years. I was ready for a little bit of a change. I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to mean. We both wanted to get trained officially, and so we decided to go out to California to attend Fuller Seminary and get our MDivs with this idea that we were going to be a kind of pastor couple. We were going to probably do like senior pastorship or church planting. And that was really kind of the dream and vision. And we started doing some of that out there together. We started working on church staffs. We were really kind of working towards this future. And we kind of had a big hard turn towards the moment that we were really getting ready to go into ministry together.
Yeah, we were really excited about doing ministry together. We also had a passion, I think, for marriages. From very early on in our marriage, we really wanted ourselves to have a healthy, thriving relationship. We wanted to help encourage other people. And so we had kind of thought about potentially doing some marriage work in ministry. And while we were at seminary, we experienced a program. At the time, it was called Strong Marriages, Successful Ministries. And it was for pastor couples going through seminary with the understanding of the healthier and the stronger of a marriage that you have, the more likely it is that your ministry is going to thrive. And so it really was to kind of pour into these marriages, these relationships, so you would have a stronger ministry. And we went through that program, and it transformed our marriage. It was like within 6 months, we were night and day around some issues that were really keeping us stuck. And so that was super exciting. So I decided to go back after the MDiv and get the MFT degree, because I knew like we wanted to be able to bring those things to the churches, to the people we were going to be serving. And so wanted additional training there.
What Joanna wasn't aware of was that during these kind of first formative years of our relationship, I was really kind of hiding this dark secret of struggling with pornography, sexual addiction, a really kind of long sexual past that Joanna really had not really been kind of given information about. And that addiction and those acting out behaviors were kind of really ramping up, and it was creating this kind of wedge between us. And so right as she's starting this program, right as we're trying to figure out, what ministry is going to be for us, it hit the fan, right? Everything came out. And interestingly enough, it came out because a pastor came and gave a testimony at Joanna's program, and really shined a light on what we were going through. It helped her to figure out what was kind of happening. She came home, kind of told me about this story and said, hey, is this something you're dealing with? Is this actually what's happening in our relationship? And finally, after years of lying, I confessed and said yes. And
Wow.
That's really where things started to change for us, because we knew kind of everything was on hold, because we didn't know what our future was going to be at the moment.
Yeah.
We just knew we had to heal from the betrayal that had kind of really rocked our world. And so we started on a long journey of recovery, kind of personally and then relationally. And all the while not really knowing what the future of ministry would be for us. We weren't quite sure kind of what it would look like.
There's a lot of wondering, is that even in our future anymore, working together, serving on a ministry, on a church staff together. And we also had some significant, I think, experiences while you were working on church staffs that continued to steer us in the direction of marriages. Matthew was a family and youth pastor at a church there in Pasadena, California, and leader after leader that was serving, kind of helping him with these students, they kept stepping out of leadership because they were struggling in their marriage. and finally we were just kind of like, okay, I think it's a sign. I think God wants us to be all in on marriage in some way. And so we kind of dove into we really had a heart to do that in and through the church, I think, in the beginning. And so we were really seeking kind of where and how to do that in church, on church staffs. And we also had a heart to connect churches to the mental health community. And so I was able to serve in a church counseling center for many years, kind of helping them connect great mental health tools with that kind of pastoral counseling piece. And so that was, I think, really formative as well.
Joanna, there's something that was stirring in you as you're listening to this pastor come into your class that stirred something for you to lean in with Matthew and say, is this you? What was going on? What were some of the signs that you were seeing or feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it was just in our relationship, I had already felt like something's going on, but I couldn't put my finger on it. We had done a lot of work through that course that I kind of mentioned. We had changed a lot of our patterns in really good ways. We had gotten closer to one another, but something was still missing. We still weren't quite as close, quite as securely attached as I kind of expected or as I wanted to in terms of like our emotional intimacy. And I couldn't figure out why, and it was driving me crazy, almost to the point that I had given up. And so as this pastor was talking, it was crazy. My gut was just telling me, this is it. This is the thing, as he was describing his life, his relationship before recovery, after recovery. And I think Matthew had mentioned some things, but he always said it was always past tense. I used to struggle. This used to be a part of my life, right? And I think in that moment I knew, well, if this is still a thing, it would answer all my questions. right? And so I was like, okay, I have to ask him very directly now. And I think I finally had the courage to ask him directly because we had resources, right? That pastor sharing his testimony, sharing the steps that helped him find freedom, helped him and his wife find reconciliation, right? I'm writing each one down, right? And it finally felt like there is a possibility of healing if the answer is yes when I ask this question.
Well, I just want to say thank you for sharing that part of your story with us and with all of the listeners, people that are tuning in. And I'm so glad that you did because I unfortunately, and you guys probably, maybe you see this just in your counseling experience, like this is a really common issue in marriages. I mean, global, I mean, in our country, but, especially in the church. But I was also thinking as you guys were talking of like the hope of you guys sharing your testimony, because here you are, literally, God is calling you to marriage ministry and all this stuff is going on. And I know that there are probably people listening thinking that they know what's going on inside their own lives and hearts and minds and feeling like they have disqualified themselves from
Yeah.
ministry because of what's happening. Um, what would you say to someone who's listening right now who knows they're in trouble and maybe they're even struggling in the very area that they're supposed to be helping and serving others? That's feeling like, you know what, I'm out, I'm done, I quit. Like the voices of the enemy are very loud. That this is
Mhm.
it for me.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember when we were in seminary, we were taking part in a program to explore whether or not we had the chops to be church planters. We didn't, by the way. We failed that class, which I'm kind of thankful for now. But I remember they were talking. We were reading a book on leadership, and it said the best thing that you can bring to leadership is your own transforming self. And so I think for people who are struggling, this will be your leadership if it's what you intend to. It might not be the area you think you want to lead. When Joanna and I were going through all of this, our own personal recovery, I remember telling her specifically, we are not going to be the pornography people. We are not going to be the couple that goes around and talks about sex and pornography and betrayal
Famous
and
last words.
addiction. I was like, that I don't want people to know us for that. And it was like years later, we were doing a video curriculum because Pepperdine had asked us to teach. And they said, would you teach on pornography? And I kind of looked at Joanna. I was like, we are the pornography couple. That is who we are. Let's just embrace it. Right. But I think it's because it's where we've experienced this transformation. I think we always had a heart for marriages. But it wasn't until our marriage was transformed and our lives were transformed that we really understood how God was going to use us specifically. And if you pour into your transforming self, right? If you pour resources into yourself, it will open up a ministry. It will open up an opportunity to serve because there are going to be people who hear your story and say, I want a piece of that. Like, I want what you have found. And that to us, I think, is the best part of what we get to today. Like, we don't work in the church, but we get to help so many couples. We get to take on so many experiences and families that we get to transform. And it feels like ministry, right? It feels like we are right in God's mission, just in a very different way, kind of professionally than we thought. We thought we were going to be 12 years ago. And so I think, but leaning into yourself. I mean, we were lucky because I wasn't in active ministry at the time. And so this actually became kind of our full-time job, was recovery. It was like everything is going to pour into this. And we really didn't get back into active ministry until this had really been dealt with, especially for me. I really wanted to deal with this because it had been a part of my life in ministry for years. I had buried it. I had hid it. Right. I never wanted anyone to know about it or talk about it while still trying to do ministry. And it was kind of eating me alive, that lack of congruence.
Carrying it.
And that lack of integrity. And so having the space to heal myself and heal our marriage, I think, is what helped us get back into really kind of serving in God's capacity.
And I think so much more meaningful for the work we're doing, that it's coming out of our own story, right? God is
100%.
using our pain for a purpose in the work we're doing. And that is just so life-giving, I think, as well.
Yeah.
A lot of times the depression and the hopelessness starts to set in when you don't feel like there's any options or solutions for your problem. And, we see this with teenagers. Teenagers are often the ones who have the least amount of options in the world. Like, if I don't like my job, I'll just change my job. Even if you don't like your spouse, you can change your spouse, right? Like, as an adult, you have a lot more autonomy and agency over your life. Teenagers, they're stuck, right? And so that's where you see a lot of depression, hopelessness. But I put pastors in this category of, I think that they feel like they have a lot less options. Um, how do I actually go and get the help that I need? But I can't let anybody know. I can't, if you have your
Yeah.
own counseling program that's attached to your church, you definitely, like I needed help. We had a counseling center at our church. I'm not going to the counseling center at our church. I'm driving 30 minutes away to the one nobody knows that exists over there, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
but tell me, for the pastors who are listening, and I know that we have people who are listening. We know pastors who have had marriage conferences for their church, but really it was for them. I know pastors who are currently going through separation and are really feeling the pain. I know pastors who are talking to us and calling and saying, "I don't think that we're going to make it." Uh,
Mm.
why should we change how we look at some of this? What are some of the resources and options that
Mhm.
people in ministry have? And it's not just the pastor who's there in the pulpit, right? There are very lonely and struggling wives of
Yeah.
pastors, right? And spouses.
Yeah.
And so help us have a little bit of where can we go? How do we do this? And just kind of drop the fig leaf and say, we need some help.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're in a really exciting time because of the way that our world has moved in the last 5 years. So many more resources are available to people across the world. I mean, we see
Yeah.
clients. We have clients in the United Kingdom, in Egypt, Australia. We have people all over the world who've heard our story or want to work with our team and reach out to us. And a lot of times, because they haven't had the resources that they need locally, or they haven't felt like the resources were safe for them. Like you said, like maybe it's like, hey, I'm a pastor and I'm well known in my town. And for me to walk into, into this office, maybe is going to create some safety, right? Even for my family. Or I'm a spouse of a pastor and if I go get help, right, what does that say about our marriage? And so because we've created this digital world, one of the nice pieces of it is that you can work with professionals all over the country who specialize in particularly what you need. And I think that is the other part is that there are great resources out there. There are so many counselors that we've met. We go to this Association of Christian Counselors. It's like 9,000 people who show up every 2 years who all have a heart for God and a heart for people. And many of those people are accessible. And so I think encouraging people to find resources that really hit them where they're at. I think first, just recognizing that.
And maybe find resources before you get to that crisis place. We would really encourage, because all of us need help learning things.
just a thought.
Just a thought. And especially pastors, right? Because we've been in that world of ministry, and there's like a love-hate relationship with the way churches are run and the pressure put on pastors, and right. And so like things like self-regulation, healthy boundaries, self-care, like all these things are that are vitally important to know from the beginning, to hopefully you don't get to that place of burnout or that place of crisis. But also, like Matthew's saying, knowing there are absolutely safe resources that you can plug into wherever you're at.
Yeah, I think I burned out of youth ministry like 4 different times. And it wasn't until I learned about like emotional regulation that I realized like, oh, that was me doing that. I always was like, churches have unrealistic expectations. And then I took a class on boundaries and I was like, oh, I don't have boundaries. That's the reason I keep burning out, right? And being like, I have to find a new job. And so I do think, right, sometimes it's just finding some good mental health resources, right? Some good knowledge. Because even if your marriage isn't in crisis, your heart and your soul may be in crisis, right? You may be in that place of feeling like there's no way I can do this for 20 more years. There's no way I can do this for the rest of my life. And a lot of that is just because of the unhealthy habits we've developed, and we've just never had anyone to show us different ways.
It makes me think that maybe seminaries should add in a course that's mandatory for all people going through ministries, have counselors come in and teach it and do some of the like mental health piece before they're actually launched out into ministry. Like someone should do that. I don't know who should do it, but someone should do it. And that should become, just like in school, when you're becoming a counselor, you have to see counselors, right? Like you have to go through your own process. And I believe it's recommended that you ongoing are seeing someone to help you process your stuff. I think pastors, there should be the same qualification. They're carrying the same heavy burdens and coming into ministry as regular humans, with all kinds of stuff. Anyways, I'm going to start lobbying for that.
Yeah.
Well, it does exist in some places, in some forms. I remember in my last year in seminary, they wanted us to have a soul care emphasis of that. But also, I think it's just hard to be honest when you're carrying something for a long time. But we do a lot more on the. I took pastoral care and counseling classes so I could help other people.
Right.
Not really. That's kind of the thing that
You don't need
today.
help, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Do all the things I'm not doing, and you'll be fine. Yeah. And it is hard. I do think. I mean, and honestly, for us and for me personally, it wasn't until I had heard a testimony of victory, because I had been struggling with unwanted sexual behavior for close to 20 years of my life. It was really all I knew, and I remember being in a worship service months before, and they weren't naming things specifically, but they were like, "Hey, if there's something you really want to change about yourself, you just know." And I remember like having the feeling of the Holy Spirit tugging on my heart, saying, "It is time to give this up." But I was terrified, and I didn't want to go forward, mainly because I just didn't know what the next step was going to be if I confessed that this was what was going on. It wasn't until I was hearing stories of people whose lives were good after confession, right? After naming that they were struggling, that I felt like I had enough courage to go, okay, I'll deal with this. And so I think one of the things we can do is create more testimonies. I mean, it's one of the reasons we tell our story, because we recognize like there are people out there that haven't heard that there is good life after dealing with some of the underlying issues that are really pulling you apart. And so that ability to tell those stories, I think, matters a lot, because it helps overcome that kind of hopelessness, that stuckness, like Matt was talking about, where it's like, I don't know that there's any path forward for me if this ever comes out.
What do you do when we have a situation? We have a lot of decision makers, whether they're the executive pastor, the senior pastor, part of the HR team that are listening, and it might not be their problem in particular, but they have somebody on their team that's struggling. Can you be in ministry and have these issues? I know you can be, but can you continue to? How do you coach somebody, like, if there's an issue of pornography? I can't tell you how many pastors I know, like, and we take a lot of phone calls with pastors who are in their cars in the church parking lot having this conversation with me because they can't sit in their office, obviously, right? And they're emailing us from their personal emails. But can somebody in ministry work through this and still be in ministry? Maybe they need a season off or whatever, but how do you suggest they move forward?
I think it's so case by case. We've worked with a lot of pastors who are in ministry, and I think it depends a lot in their kind of personal motivation to find freedom and do the work required. Right? It's hard work. You have to really dive into recovery. You have to be willing to change a lot of aspects of your life. But we've also seen some really beautiful stories of pastors who have been open and vulnerable, especially with the other leadership. And the leadership has stepped up and supported them and said, we want to help support you in getting the help you need so you can come back healthier to continue serving this congregation, and really given them the space they needed to go and find that healing and get recovery, but staying kind of connected to the community. I think that is such a beautiful model. And part of it, right, is even very personal to us, that pastor who came and shared in that class and started our recovery journey. He was 3 years into his sobriety, and he had been open and honest with his church board, with the staff, and said, like, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm struggling with. And they kind of came together and said, you know what, we're going to surround you, we're going to support you in finding healing, and we want you to stay our senior pastor, while you go through that. And their grace and their support helped him in his recovery journey, led him to come speak at that class, spawned our recovery journey. And 5 years later, we found ourselves in a different city, sitting at a breakfast. Matthew was telling our story, and down at the end of the table, a pastor said, "Hey, that's my story." And we're like, "Oh, that's great. You've been through that too." And he goes, "No, I was the pastor in your wife's class 5 years ago. And I'm looking for a couple to come start a recovery and marriage ministry at our church." And we ended up going to his church and serving at his church.
And my favorite part, you asking about thought, like kind of leaders. The director of the elder board was one of the couples that we trained at that church to help marriages, because they wanted us to come and train people. And he came to me and he's like, "I am so glad that God brought you to our church." And we were talking, and he was on the elder board that had decided to keep this pastor when he had confessed. And I said, "Your courage to keep this church, right, and this pastor is the reason that you're getting to see this ministry flourish." I was like, you're the faith that you had in God to protect this community. And it was so cool, because it was just like seeing, I think, the work of God and the mission really play out. And he was like, "I would have never thought, right, that this is how it would be playing out." And he was talking about, "This is blessing my own marriage." And I was like, it kind of comes around, right? And so I really do. I think it is case by case, but there is so much healing, and I think being real, because the truth is, what's happening with pastors is happening with so many marriages in the community. It is happening with people that are sitting in their pews. That church, every Easter, the pastor gets up and tells his story of betrayal and tells his story of addiction on Easter Sunday, right? And so all of these once-a-year Christians are walking in and going, "What are they talking about?" Right? And we love it, right? Because it's amazing how many people after Easter are like, "This church, they talk about the real stuff," right? They talk about the real nitty-gritty.
That's actually, I think, the kind of leadership churches need. Like the vulnerable leader to stand up and say, like, "I'm not perfect. This was my story." And I mean, that must have transformed a community to make a lot of other people feel safe to come forward with the things that they were holding, because their leader modeled it. I wish that our story had ended more like that. I think I can share that it looked like in the beginning, after Matt stepped away, that they were going to bring him back on staff. And I think that there was a tremendous opportunity there for redemption, not just for him and for us with the community, but for the church at large, and even a stronghold that had been present in that church over and over in leadership for a long time. And I still feel that there was a huge opportunity that was missed because the leaders chose to go a different way. And he was a guy that was doing the work. Like, he was putting his money where his mouth was. He was doing the things, we were doing the things. And it's sad to me that the story kind of ended the way that it did, And I love what you guys shared. Like, I wish more churches would do that.
Well, and aren't we as Christians supposed to be the people that believe that God raises dead things back to life, right? And so that's part of our story of the resurrection story, and it was confrontation. It was a very real moment for us, and really started with Marilee. But we have to be the people who have hope that God will raise dead things to life, and I mean, it's perfectly manifested in our story, in your story, and it proves once again that there is life after ministry. And
Yes.
God is good despite all of our fumbles along the way, right? So, hey,
Very true.
I love hearing what you guys have going on, and I'm sure we could go for another round here. But I want people to connect with you. I think that there are people in ministry who are hurting, who could benefit from just having a conversation, or needing a safe place. It might be in their car in the church parking lot, but just
Yes.
even that presence to be able to say there are options and you can get through it. But how do we get connected to you guys? You are a thing, and people can find you on the World Wide Web
We
and all
are
the
a thing.
places.
I do have a
Yeah,
book.
and lucky for
And
us,
you're
Yeah.
more than the pornography people. Okay, I
we
just want you to know.
are.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah.
We help lots of folks. Our specialty is in marriage, but we work with individuals. We work with couples.
Mhm.
The nice part is we're the only Raabsmiths in the whole entire world. So I grew up Smith. Joanna grew up Raab. We combined our last names, so we're the only
Oh,
ones that exist. So if you just look up Raabsmith Team, you'll find us. But we try to make it a little easier. We have a nice, simple little website, raabsmithteam.com. One of our favorite things is to give away free resources. We recognize that the hardest thing couples have to do, I think one of the biggest kind of blocks for couples is just connecting in a healthy way regularly. And so a few years ago, we created a check-in template, right? Just a really easy daily conversation starter that helps couples just connect better. And so if your listeners go to raabsmithteam.com/free, they will be able to pick that up and be able to use it right away. We kind of do a little 30-day challenge with them. We encourage them to connect, to talk. And because our desire is for people to thrive. I think we are experiencing a life that we never, I think, thought possible in the darkest days of our journey. And so that's what we're really wanting other people to feel.
Well, Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith, the only Raabsmiths in the world. And we'll put all the links for all of the stuff on the show notes there. But thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the ministry that you guys are doing and hearts that are being healed because of you. We're blessed, and we thank you guys.
Thanks
Thanks
for
so
having
much.
us.
thank you, Matthew and Joanna, for joining us today. This has been a great conversation, and I hope that it has brought some hope to some people that are out there listening and maybe feeling a little stuck.
If you're one of those people that feels stuck, you're not sure what to do next, feel like all could be lost. Number one, I'd say reach out and talk to Matthew and Joanna, and we'll have all the links there in the notes. You can see those right now. But also, we just want you to know that if you're a pastor and you are in a season where you're not sure what's going to happen, you need some help in the transition season, or maybe you are a decision maker, leader in not just your church, but your nonprofit, your missions agency, your kingdom business, higher ed in the Christian world. Though our title is Pastoral Transitions, we get to serve really the kingdom, and that's what we're about. How do we actually, for people who are in a season of transition, just trying to figure out what's next, or you are working with somebody on your team who's just in a place of hurt and needs to transition, what's next for them? This is a good place. You can reach us at talk@pastoraltransitions.com. And for those of you who have a heart to come alongside people who are in ministry, who need some help, who need some counseling, who need some hope, we get to be a conduit of those gifts and those donations. And so you can get all of that on our website at pastoraltransitions.com. So thanks for listening in. This is the Life After Ministry podcast.